بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, today we will continue from chapter 21, which was about wara, scrupulousness, righteousness, in other words. It's a very powerful chapter with very stark reminders about the righteousness and the principles that those people before us, our pious predecessors, how they behaved. We last week, I believe, we covered the first page and a little bit. So we'll continue from page 78, where Imam al-Haddad, he talks about things which are prohibited. So he says, know that prohibited things are of two categories. Firstly, there are those which are prohibited in themselves, for example, blood and alcohol and so on. These are straightforward examples of things which are inherently haram and they are never permissible except in life and death situations. Secondly, that which is permissible in itself, such as wood and clean water, but which is owned by someone else, thus remaining permissible until impermissible until it's acquired by lawful means. So, for example, there are other things which are impermissible, not because they are inherently impure or things like this, but rather they are pure things, but they belong to somebody else. So obviously, if you've got a bottle of water and it's yours, and I steal that, then that permissible thing has become impermissible. I mean, that's fairly straightforward. The real point of contention and the thing for us to deliberate on is not even on the halal and the haram, because the Prophet ﷺ has said in a hadith, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيِّنْ وَإِنَّ الْحَرَامَ بَيِّنْ وَبَيْنَهُمَا مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ لَا يَعْلَمُهُنَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. It's quite a long hadith, that the halal is clear and the haram is clear, right? And it's also true, in a modern day context. If you asked generally if something is halal, most people know those things which are halal and those things which are haram, right? But the issue comes, and the hadith says, between the halal and the haram are doubtful matters that most people don't know about. Okay, so between the halal and the haram, there are doubtful matters most people don't know about. And the hadith continues, the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever protects themselves from doubtful matters protects his deen and it secures his deen and his honor, right? And whoever falls into doubtful matters, eventually they fall into haram. So that's what the next part of the discussion is about. So Imam al-Haddad says, doubtful or suspect things are of many degrees. In the case of some, you may be almost convinced of their being prohibited, but still entertain the possibility of their being permissible. These things should be considered prohibited, right? So he starts by saying that. He says, there are things which are most likely prohibited, right? So severely doubtful, but there's a chance that they could be permissible, right? So, your overwhelming thought is that this is impermissible, but then there's a chance or something inside of you that says, no, actually, it might well be permissible. For the righteous person, that thing must be avoided, because your overwhelming thought in your mind is that it's not allowed, it's not permissible. Other things you may be convinced are permissible, but a suspicion exists that they may be prohibited. These should be avoided out of righteousness. Okay, so the other scenario, the opposite, is where you have something, you're not sure if it's halal or haram, but your overwhelming thought in your mind is that it's permissible, but there's still something of a doubt in your mind that, or something inside of you says actually it could be impermissible, right? But overwhelmingly you think it's allowed. Imam al-Haddad says even that thing, which the overwhelming thought in your mind is that it's allowed, it should be avoided out of righteousness, right? So in other words, the righteous people are those who just avoid doubtful matters. That's the golden principle. Righteous people are those who avoid doubtful matters altogether. And that's really the gauge of our piety, honestly, because obviously the bare minimum is to avoid the haram activities, right? Even, people who wouldn't claim to be or are not known to be religious or righteous, they tend to avoid the major haram actions, most of them anyway. So that then we go up a level, isn't it? And what's a level above the haram is the doubtful. So, and that's where the biggest spectrum is. So really, how cautious we are in relation to things we're not certain about, that really is our litmus test to see where we are on the piety spectrum, in other words. The Prophet ﷺ said, famous hadith, leave that which is suspect in favor of that which is not. Da' ma yuribuka ila ma la yuribuk. Golden principle. Da' ma yuribuk ila ma la yuribuk. Leave that which gives you doubt to that which does not give you doubt, or for that which doesn't give you doubt. If you got one thing which is doubtful, another thing which is not doubtful, leave the doubtful thing and go to the undoubtful thing. Imam al-Haddad says, now listen carefully, he says, a man's scrupulousness is measured by his abstaining from anything suspect until its status is clarified. A servant of God does not become a true man of taqwa until he abstains from things which are undoubtedly licit, for fear of that which may follow and be doubtful or illicit. Okay, so Imam al-Haddad is simply confirming what I said a few moments ago, that the measure of your wara, your piety, is that you abstain from things which are suspect until they're clarified. So if there's a way of clarifying something, then clarify it, but you don't engage in that thing until you've got to the bottom of it. Okay, now for example, there's a legal issue right now. Is this is this item halal or haram? Is a particular food halal or haram? Is a particular musical instrument halal or haram? We don't know. So there could be elements of doubt because of our ignorance, you see. And if there is that element of ignorance which is causing the doubt, that can be removed by education. So we ask a scholar, a student, we study some books or some understandings according to our madhab, and then we can clarify, is it halal or haram, right? Is it a differed upon opinion? Are there scholars who say this is allowed? Are there scholars who say it's not allowed? What is the legal status of this particular action, or this particular food, or this particular business transaction, or this particular item of clothing, right? So the righteous one stays away until it's clarified, if it's possible to clarify that thing, because there are other types of doubt which aren't possible of clarification. And the classic example is food that we eat. Okay, now you go into a shop, let me give you a scenario. You go into a shop and there's no stickers anywhere. The person serving you is a non-Muslim, and then you ask them, is it halal? Yeah, it's halal, isn't it? This is halal, isn't it? Right, so you ask a leading question, right? So you don't even ask a normal question. You don't ask, is this halal or not, right? You ask, it's halal, isn't it? And then the person serving you, who's a non-Muslim, says, yeah, it's halal, yeah, everything's halal, yeah, right? So what should you do in that scenario? What would most people do? Now, the food that's being served, is it undoubtedly halal? No, you can't say it's undoubtedly halal. Is it undoubtedly haram? You can't say it's undoubtedly haram, because the person who owns the shop has told you that it's halal. So what do you do? Right? Now see, this is an important point as well, is that a lot of decisions that must be made, in Islam and general life is based on our personal judgments. Okay, so we have to make our personal decisions about whether we should do something, we should not do something. Okay, now this is one of those scenarios. Now, you might have two Muslims. One says, actually, I think this is too doubtful. I won't engage in it. The other person might say, well, what she said is halal, so it's fine. Can you condemn either one of them? Probably not, depending on other circumstances. You know, is it in a Muslim neighborhood? Are there lots of Muslims in the vicinity? Are there other Muslims buying from that shop? Are there Muslim workers? You know, the indications are, subtle indications are also helpful in that scenario. But can you criticize either person? No, not really. Would you say one made a better decision than the other? Yes, you can say that. You can't condemn people, but what you can say is that one person made a better decision than the other. And that was the first person who said, I'm probably not going to eat from here because I'm not sure. That's the correct answer here. Okay. And so because it supports the notion of da'ma yuribuk ila ma la yuribuk, leave that which is doubtful for that which is not doubtful. Okay. And so actually what we find is once we analyze this principle very quickly, we realize that we face these scenarios every day in our lives. And so it's really relevant to modern life, especially modern life, where really we don't have certainty about anything anymore, right? In terms of the things around us, everything is contaminated, and so the more cautious we are, the better we will be in relation to Allah Azza wa Jal. I think it goes without saying. Now, he goes even further now, Imam al-Haddad. He said, the companions used to say, we used to leave 70 permissible avenues for fear of falling into the illicit, the haram, in other words. We used to abandon 70 illicit avenues, 70 permissible avenues, out of fear of falling into the impermissible actions. That's what the attitude of the Sahaba was. And the icing on the cake is what he says next. He says, but this is something that has long gone. Imam al-Haddad said, he lived hundreds of years ago, right? He says that this is something which has long gone. Where are we now to find such righteousness as will keep us from suspect and illicit things? Right? In his day, he's saying that. Now, fast forward hundreds of years in the 21st century. I mean, if it's difficult. Okay, it's difficult. It's not impossible, because there are people, and I say this confidently, there are people in every generation who are able to attain a very high rank of righteousness. There are still people today, and I've been talking about one of our teachers, Mufti Abdul Karim Rahmatullah alayhi, in the past week, because his year anniversary of passing came. He was one of those people. One of those people who we've been describing, that his taqwa is measured against his avoiding doubtful matters. And, the one who avoids doubtful matters is the one who has secured his deen and his honor. The hadith says, Mufti Sahib Rahmatullah was one of them. And I'll give you two examples of his taqwa and his wara, his righteousness, in avoiding doubtful matters, right? Never mind the haram and excelling in the permissible and doing the obligatory things and all of those things, putting that to one side. I'll give you an example. Mufti Sahib once had a student who I know, and he used to work for a company who certified halal meats. I won't mention names, obviously, but he used to work for a company that certified halal meat. So they used to go to abattoirs, and this student was one of the guys who used to check, okay, you're following the process, stamp, halal, halal, halal. He did that job. He said to Mufti Sahib one day that, Mufti Sahib, I work in this industry, words to the effect of, obviously I wasn't there at the time. I remember being told, Mufti Sahib told me what happened. He said words to the effect of, Mufti Sahib, I work in this industry, And I have seen how people slaughter their chickens and people certify things as halal, but they're not halal. They're actually not halal. I'm telling you, right? I am careful with how I do it, but there's a number of other people in our organization that just certify things that they're not actually halal. You're saying in relation to chicken. Mufti Sahib said to him, Yaqeen hai, meaning, have you seen this yourself? Are you sure? He said, Ji, I'm sure. I work in this, I'm telling you. Ever since that day, Mufti Sahib never ate chicken. Other than chicken that he slaughtered or was slaughtered in front of his eyes. If not, then he did not eat it until the day he passed away. I'm a witness to that, right? And I'm a witness to him coming to my own home, and different food was served for him, and I think a chicken dish or salan something was served, and he looked at it. He said, "Ye kya hai?" He actually said, "What is this?" And we said, "Oh, it's chicken." He goes, I'm not eating that. I'll eat something else. Right? Once I went to a method with him up north, and it was a long drive, and we got there, and I was hungry, and he would have been hungry as well. So the host brought out some food because we'd been driving for a long time. He brought out some chicken. Mufti Saab didn't eat it. He looked at it. He said, "Yeah, kya?" He said, "I said chicken." He said, "Okay, I'm not eating that." He said to me, "You eat it. You can eat it." And he encouraged me. He said, "Khao, aap khao. I'm not eating it." That was his wara. Look at that righteousness. For years later, he didn't eat chicken on the basis of the testimony of one student. He didn't say, "Oh, Shahid, maybe this is different now. This is somewhere else. This is a different company." He didn't make any excuse. He didn't even investigate it further. You work there. You're telling me I will not eat it ever again. That's what you call righteousness. Right? And this is a man who actually, I saw him do this. The second example I'll give you, and it's honestly amazing. He said, musical instruments is the permissibility of the usage is actually a differed upon issue in Islamic law. So a lot of scholars say it's impermissible. Some scholars, allow it with certain restrictions and so on. Anyway, the legal discussion is what it is. The least controversial instrument to use for the purposes of praising Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the least controversial is the duff, the drum. The duff that everyone uses, the duff, big drum, round drum. That's the least controversial. So one day, we had a Milad Sharif at my home many years ago, and I invited Mufti Sahib to come. And he was there for a while. He spoke, and then I can't remember how it happened. I think he left the room either to do wudu or something. And then by the time he came back, we had some nasheed singers, and they were using a duff. And it's not really a controversy. It's not, and they're praising Rasulullah, so it's not like they're saying anything bad. But they were using a duff. Mufti Saab did not even go in the room where they were playing the duff. He said, "I'm not going in there because of the duff." That was his, unbelievable. Meaning, if he went in there, it wouldn't have been a condemnable action. It probably would have been permissible. I mean, he could have. I like to think I was one of his closest students. He could have said, "Jolo, I'm a guest at your house. I'll make this an exception. I'll go in." Even in my home, he didn't even go in the room. He said, "I'm not going." I actually went home. He went home because he didn't want to be there because of the duff was playing in there. You see, these are the levels that, honestly, exactly personify the principle that we're talking about. Honestly, wallahi, I'll give you, well, let me give you another example. So you have, just similarly, he never used to listen to Qawwali. He never listened to Qawwali. If he doesn't even allow the duff, certainly he's not going to allow Qawwali by extension, isn't it? Sometimes if he ever ended up in a gathering or ulama invited him to a gathering, if he ever went there and he realized that Qawwali played, and Qawwali started once or twice, he'd immediately get up and he'd go, he'd leave. He wouldn't tolerate it. because he didn't want to even be around or in that environment in which these doubtful matters occurred, right? And so, I've never seen someone as, scrupulous as Mufti Abdul Karim Jamati rahmatullah alayhi. And these are examples I saw myself. So anyway, you must know everything that Allah has forbidden you so as to be able to avoid it, for the one who does not recognize evil falls into it. So Imam al-Haddad says, in order to avoid evil, you must recognize it. This is one of the main issues that we have. The things which are evil, we don't even acknowledge them as evil. We don't see anything wrong in them, right? And then if we don't recognize things which are true and recognize the false as false, then how will we comply with the good and avoid the bad? That's why one of the main du'as we always read, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinaba. That we say, oh Allah, show us the reality as the reality, the truth as the truth, and sustain us in that. And oh Allah, show us the falsehood as the false, and sustain us in its avoidance. That's why we made that dua. Okay, so Imam al-Haddad, he then speaks in quite a bit of detail about why people don't avoid the doubtful things. He says, know that a religious man is not likely to do anything which is itself haram, such as eating forbidden animals. Okay. However, religious men are, you could say, are vulnerable to ambiguities because they neglect three things. So, and he's using the words religious men here. So righteous, not righteous, religious people are susceptible to falling into doubtful matters because of three things, he says. The first thing is that they do not investigate thoroughly where this is appropriate. Okay, so where investigation is required, they don't investigate. Okay, so, and then he breaks it down a little bit further, and he basically says, he details the circumstances in which investigation would be required. For example, if you go to somebody's, I don't want to say somebody's home, but if someone who's righteous gives you money, you don't need to investigate that. If a known drug dealer gives you money, then clearly you need to investigate that. If somebody who is not known to be a drug dealer, but there are reasonable suspicions, then you also need to avoid or investigate. So people fall into doubtful matters because they don't investigate when required. Now, the obvious example of that is food. I keep coming back to it because it's the most clear example of this. Now, we don't investigate. So, because we're not diligent in this regard. So, for example, when we go to restaurants, we just kind of very relaxed attitude. Okay, yeah, Muslim restaurant, halal food, no problem. Even if they're serving alcohol, no problem. It's fine. Just have this as halal, fine. I mean, it is difficult and it can be awkward sometimes to ask for certification, but we can do research online. But it's got to that level that certificates mean nothing as well. It's got to that level where certification actually means nothing as well. It's got to that level. So how much will you research? How far do you go with this? It's really down to somebody's own, discretion, how far they investigate, and how cautious they are, and how much they avoid or how much they indulge. Allah and His Messenger know best. Our only obligation really is to avoid, at the very least, the haram, and then investigate and try our best to avoid that which we know is doubtful, according to our rank. He said the second is that they do not safeguard themselves against invalid transactions. So he talks a little bit about business transactions and, whether they are permissible or not, whether they fulfill the conditions of Sharia, but he doesn't dwell on that too much. The third is that they are engrossed in the world's cravings and indulge abundantly in its pleasures. Scrupulousness under such circumstances becomes difficult and the lawful is narrowed down. Lawful things do not bear extravagance. So the third reason that people who purport to be religious fall into doubtful matters is because they are engrossed in the world's cravings and indulge abundantly in its pleasures, right? So that's quite a powerful statement. And it's true. I mean, if you give us an inch, we'll take a mile. All right, that's our approach to things. We have an approach where we basically say to ourselves in relation to everything, well, it's not haram, is it? You know, it's not that bad, is it? Or we say to ourselves to justify it to things to ourselves, we say, well, at least it's not this, right? For example, music. We might listen to certain types of music and we justify to ourselves, well, look, at least he's not swearing in it. At least they are, not vulgar lyrics, are they? So we have this minimalistic approach to everything. We don't set the bar very high we don't set the bar very high for ourselves, which is why we never really disappointed, because the bar is so low that we can't really fall below that. You see, so we just need a fundamental shift in approach. Now, that's what this book is designed to do: is to look up, not to look down. Look up, set the bar high, and strive to reach that bar, as opposed to setting it so low that you just, mashallah, fantastic. You see, so yeah, drowning the world basically. He says righteousness is rendered easy for those who want only what is necessary from the world, and that's very true. You see, righteousness is easy for those who stick to the minimum of the worldly matters. So if you the more you indulge in the dunya, the harder it is to control that, you see. And of course, in practical terms, in the modern world, there is, of course, importance attached to succeeding in the dunya, not for the sake of the dunya, but for the sake of the deen. Because if we don't have anything in the dunya, how will we ever propagate the true message of Islam? How can we ever fight the forces of evil if we don't have enough to feed our families, right? So there is a merit in that argument. And obviously, these are all general principles and guidelines, and things that we have to bear in mind. But the emphasis in this chapter is about the pure righteousness. And on that basis, the easiest way to attain those levels is to simply do without as much as you can, right? And become accustomed to that. Okay. All right, so let's move on now. Because I wanted to cover the next chapter. It's only a couple of pages, but honestly, it's one of the most beautiful principles I feel in the book. Chapter 22 on enjoining good and forbidding evil. It's one of the most beautiful chapters, but also it's one of the most neglected as well, right? Enjoining good and forbidding evil. And I'll make a couple of preliminary points and then we'll move. In fact, I'll read the first sentence because it summarizes a lot. So Imam al-Haddad, he says, you must enjoin good and forbid evil, for this is the pivot around which religion revolves. This is the pivot around which the religion revolves. And it is the reason why Allah revealed the Quran and his messengers and sent his messengers. Right? That's the reason. The reason for the prophets and the messengers and the sacred books is to enjoin good and forbid evil. That's the whole point of the Quran Sharif. To tell us what's good, tell us what's bad. Tell us to do the good, stay away from the bad. In simple terms, that's what it is. Right? What did the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam come to do? Do this, believe in this, it's good for you. Don't do this, don't believe in this, because that is misguidance and it will take you to the hellfire. Right? That's the summary, isn't it, really? And that's why it's such a, powerful idea. The issue is that nobody does it anymore, hardly. Okay. um we have become a community where people don't know how to correct others, and they don't know how to advise others. And we have also those who are being corrected or being advised don't know how to accept advice. They don't know how to be corrected anymore. So we're failing on both, because even when we talk about enjoining good, there has to be someone who's enjoining, someone who's encouraging, and the one who's being encouraged. But in order for this principle to be successfully applied, it has to work from both sides. Now, you might have someone who's the best advisor you can think of, the most wise person to correct the conduct of an individual. And he says things in the most beautiful way, right? Perfect. Part one is complete because he'll say things very nicely, calmly, gently. If that, on the other end, if that person is completely dumb, deaf, and blind, and he doesn't want to listen, and to the most obvious advice, then we won't succeed in that, you see. So the problem is twofold. The people don't know how to correct and advise. People don't know how to be advised, and they don't know how to be corrected. Okay. But it's fundamental to the upkeep of our religion, because when people no longer stand for the good and stand against evil, what's left then? You see, if we're seeing lots of evil everywhere, and we're all as a community just staying quiet and not saying anything, and nobody's praying, nobody's doing the right things, but then no one's telling them to do the right things, what's the point of religion? What's the point of our being Muslims if we can't even encourage those around us to do the right thing? Right? Do you see? It's very, it's such an overlooked thing now. And a good character, and a good character is not a character that just agrees with everyone. A righteous person is not that person who, whether others are doing right or wrong, they love them the same. That's not a good character. Good character is if somebody is close to that person and they're doing bad, then they hate that bad action for the sake of Allah. They don't hate the person, they still love the person, but they hate and they despise that action for the sake of Allah because it's disobedience to Allah. And they do their best to encourage them to do the right thing. Right? There's a big difference there. We've become accustomed to loving people for our own sake and hating people for our own sake. Whereas that's not, again, what believers should do. That's not the attitude believers should have. We should love for the sake of Allah, and we should have hatred or dislike for the sake of Allah. Meaning, if let's say, if somebody wrongs me, I hate them. Right? I have hatred towards this person. Why do I have hatred towards this person? Because he did something wrong to me. That is misdirected. That shouldn't be the case. It should be this person, just to give example, doesn't pray, doesn't do anything, is horrible to their parents, is not nice to their brother and sister, is not nice to their sibling, steals, is an adulterer, does this, all of these things. Now, the dislike of that person's actions should be on the basis of Allah's dislike for them as well. So you dislike what Allah dislikes, that's it. And you love that which Allah loves, right? That's another way of looking at it. So if someone does all of these aforementioned things, you dislike those actions because Allah dislikes them, and you hate them because Allah hates them, right? And so, we have to essentially train ourselves to, or you could say, synchronize ourselves with loving that which Allah loves and hating that which Allah hates. And a beautiful example of this is Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where his son had not yet accepted Islam, and he was on the opposing force in one of the battles. Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq was fighting with the Messenger of Allah and his son, was fighting for the kuffar, the disbelievers. And after the battle, his son said to Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, I saw you on the battlefield and I had a chance to kill you, but I didn't kill you because you're my father. Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, had I seen you on the battlefield, I would have killed you. That's the difference between the attitude of someone who's connected to Allah and His Rasul and those who love for the sake of the dunya. Love for the sake of the dunya. Right? To that level, I mean, you couldn't criticize. Today we wouldn't criticize that person. But, look at the iman of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He said, you're my son, notwithstanding the fact that means nothing to me. You're Allah's and His Rasul's enemy. And had I had the opportunity, I would have taken you out. Saying to his own son, right? There's another hadith comes to mind in Mishkat Sharif, where a companion, or rather a companion, he presented something to his son about the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the son disrespected that thing. After that day, the hadith Sharif says that the father never spoke to his son ever again because he disrespected something about the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. See, that's what I mean. So not personal, it's just for Allah. So that, comes into enjoining good and forbidding evil. So, but by extension. All right, so anyway, let's continue. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, any one of you who sees something bad should change it with his hand. If he is unable to, then with his tongue. And if he's unable to, then with his heart, which is the weakest of faith, right? So hand, if not with hand, with tongue. If not with tongue, then with heart. And with the heart is the least level. But interestingly, in that hadith, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, he should seek to change it with his heart, and that's the lowest of faith, means that things can be changed with the heart. Do you see? It's the lowest level, but because it's the most indirect. The most direct way of correcting someone is with your hands. The next level of, in terms of directness is with your speech. But even if you do with the indirect way of your heart, that can still change a person, meaning your sincere du'as for them, your sincere supplication, your well wishes for that person can be sufficient to change their conduct. But what's better is to actually directly do that. Now, clearly, there would be principles associated with correcting people. And it's not everybody's job to use their hands or to forcibly correct others. Now, if you look at the commentaries of this, what this means is that those who are allowed to use their hands to physically enforce goodness are the governments and the rulers, right? Because that's their jurisdiction, that if someone steps out of line, you can punish them by way of a punishment through the state. So the general community is not obliged to do that. And then when you're talking about with the tongue, whilst there are circumstances which apply to everybody, but generally speaking, that they say that this applies to the learned and the knowledgeable ones, because that's the job of the scholars, to at least correct people, because they have the knowledge to do that. Because if someone doesn't have knowledge, and this is another problem actually, having said one of the things I've said, another issue is that people try to correct them when they have no knowledge. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. And in fact, this is another, it's an evil. And we see this very often, unfortunately, where people don't know anything. And then they'll I don't know, they'll see your topi slightly bent and they say, brother, you're an imam, you should wear your topi properly. Yes, okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Mashallah, that's amazing advice. They can't help themselves but voice an opinion which is utterly nonsense most of the time. But we have a habit of just talking when no one cares what we're saying, to be honest. So I guess this is why we're a community of extremes, where either we don't do something at all, or we do it completely wrong, right? Or we just do it completely wrong. So anyway, so correcting people with the tongue was actually the job of those with understanding of the religion. and Allah give tawfiq. But it still has an application in the sense of parent to child, teacher to student. So everyone has a level in which they can apply this hadith sharif, depending on who's within their sphere of influence, right? So your spouse, your brothers, your sisters, children, they are all within your I don't like to use the word jurisdiction, but within your immediate circle. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ said, "By the one in whose hand lies my soul, you will enjoin good and forbid evil, or Allah will soon send his punishment upon you, whereupon you will pray and not be answered." Okay, so if people want to know why our prayers are not answered, there's a hadith sharif to this effect. And the one who is not compassionate to our young and respectful to our elders, and who does not enjoin good and forbid evil, is not one of us. Okay, is not one of us. An important point here, know that enjoining good and forbidding evil is a collective obligation. Right? So everybody can breathe a sigh of relief that it's a fard kifaya. Imam al-Haddad says it's fard kifaya. What that means is, if it is discharged by some, it is not incumbent upon the rest, and the reward being proper to those who discharged it. If nobody does it, then everyone who is aware of it and able to act is held responsible. Okay, so Fard Kifaya, the basic principle is, as a it's a communal obligation. As long as somebody does it, that suffices. If nobody does it, then you're all sinful. Okay, so I mean, it can be a case of everybody looks towards somebody else to do something, but as long as somebody stands up and does it, then alhamdulillah, then we'll all be saved. Okay. Imam al-Haddadi continues, whenever you enjoin good or forbid evil and are not listened to, you must leave the place where evil is being committed and those who commit it until they return to Allah's commands. Likewise, you must detest sins and those who persist in committing them and abhor them for the sake of Allah, this being a duty for all Muslims. Okay, so we've spoken about this in the sense that leaving places of misguidance and disobedience. Okay, this is another manifestation of righteousness, is that even if we're not doing the evil action, we don't tolerate it being in the presence of that. Okay, so again, these are aspirations that we must have for ourselves, that leave gatherings or leave people of disobedience, leave them to their disobedience. I mean, we don't have to abandon them altogether, because naturally we have to guide, help, assist, and we can't avoid people altogether, but leave their disobedience to them. When you become angry because you were wronged or insulted, and this shows on your face, and you find that your loathing of that deed and the person who did it are more than your loathing of any evil that you see or hear about, then know for certain that your faith is weak, and your honor and wealth are dearer to you than your religion, right? So your honor and your wealth are more dearer to you than your religion, because you became more angry when someone insulted you instead of when they insulted Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? Or you are more angry because they said something against you or your family, as opposed to how angry you were when they spoke against Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So anger is one of those qualities which is an innate attribute which we can't get rid of, and nor should we get rid of, but it must be directed in the right way, you see, and controlled. Okay. So then Imam al-Haddad, he talks about certain exceptions. And to summarize, basically, that the exception to commanding good and forbidding evil is where you know that your words will neither be listened to nor accepted. Okay, or you will suffer harm as a result of that. So if you say something to someone, they'll come and attack you. Then obviously you don't have to do that, then, isn't it? You don't have to put yourself in danger. But the first exception, I think that almost suffices for most of us, that you don't have to correct someone if you are sure they won't listen, because that's probably everyone. No one listens to anyone anymore, you see. So who are you to tell me? Don't you know who I am? Go and ask him who I am. These are the lines. And you're telling me to do this, and your top is not on right. That doesn't make sense. See, it's our egos have blinded us, absolutely blinded us to, and it's a kind of a curse, I feel, that people can't see the wrong actions within themselves, even when 100 people are telling you that you're completely deluded and you're doing things wrong. And out of genuine concern, people are saying to you, and then they just don't see it. They don't want to accept it. Stubbornness. Okay, so those are the exceptions. Know that when you enjoin or forbid something, that this should be done sincerely for Allah, gently, wisely, and with compassion, for these attributes do not combine in one person who acts and refrains in accordance with his injunctions, but that his words become effective and evoke reverence, a powerful response from the heart and a sweetness in the ears. Seldom shall his words be rejected. Okay, so, crucially is that when somebody's correcting or enjoining, commanding good, they must do so with wisdom. To do so with wisdom. Wisdom dictates that you speak to everybody in a manner that they understand, and use language that they will appreciate in a format that they will understand. And you speak to them at a time they will understand, they are willing to understand. Timing is everything, really. One of the ways to think about this, timing is everything. You have someone who for 5 years is gone off the rails, and I've seen this before. So people will go off the rails and you're concerned about them and you make dua for them, but you never feel that there's a right time to sit down and speak to them, for fear that they will go even further away, because they'll feel, oh, you're preaching to me. So you hold back, hold back, hold back. With your du'as, sincere du'as, there will be a time when that person comes to you and says, I need your help, or I need your advice. Or there'll be a moment, inshallah Aziz, in the future where you will have that opportunity to speak to them and advise them. And when their hearts are softened by Allah, in other words, that sometimes you just have to wait for that softness to manifest itself from that person, then you can speak to them. And this is actually how a lot of the friends of Allah operate. They just sit there. People come to them. They don't go around saying, oh, do you need help? Do you need advice? Can I advise you? Can I guide you? They just sit there and everybody comes to them. So, Allah Ta'ala puts the capacity within some people to guide others, and then he also makes those people's hearts amenable to guidance, all within certain times, you see. So we just have to, but again, it's about recognizing those moments. Okay, this is the time that I can correct this person. Even with children, even with spouses, even with siblings, there's always perfect times, certain times when we can do it, and that's part of the subtleties of applying this. So the last thing we want to do is try to correct someone or command good in such a way that pushes someone all the way against us. And this is, again, another way that people misapply this principle by being overly zealous, right? So in the, or narrow-minded in their application. So for example, the religion says that we have to enjoin good. Okay, so everyone, they just go and badger everybody. They just harass everyone. And there are people like that. They might be well-intentioned, but they're still deluded, right? And they're still lacking, basic understanding of the principle and how to apply it. Wisdom, no tarbiyah, and they just think, okay, who can I target now? Who can I target now, right? Who can I get? And, I remember, it's really funny actually, when we were younger, we went to the masjid for Tarawih, and after Tarawih, there'd be certain brothers that used to stand at the back, because they used to have gatherings after Taraweeh. Obviously, everybody's tired after Taraweeh. They just want to go home. These brothers used to stand at the back of the masjid, and as everyone's trying to leave, they literally try to, brother, they try to just, grab everybody. And it literally became a case of just trying to dodge the brothers on the way out in the masjid. So if, let's say, someone's brother's going that way, quickly go that way so you can get out without having to talk to them, because they're annoying. They're annoying. It's just badgering people. Now, Allah will reward them. I'm not saying that He'll not reward them, but that's not the way to do this. It's not the way. That's not the way of meaningful change in instilling or being the protagonist for change in that person's life. That's not the way to do that. But neither is it the way to just be overly passive. I think that's a good balance there. So the way isn't to badger people, but the way also is not to just be completely passive and never say anything. Right? Where there's avenues to correct, we should correct. Where there's avenues to assist and to rectify certain things, we should do that. Right? We should. Okay. Now, when and how and the formats, everybody can use their own initiative. Okay, next. Yeah, then, there's a couple of points I think we've already mentioned. So inshallah, we'll leave it there today. Next week, inshallah, there is a chapter on social duties. Following that, kindness and charity. And then following that on counsel, which will be a good one. Inshallah, so Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq to continue studying and give us the ability to act upon what we discussed. Ameen wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.